Welcome back to the Creo Parametric tutorial series. Again, my name is Lucas, and beginning with this video, we are going to actually get into Creo and start creating. Today, we're going to start with the basics. We'll call this Parametric Modeling Fundamentals. We're going to start learning 2D sketches, the basics of parametrics, how to create simple extrusions. We're going to learn the concept of shape before size. We'll do some creation and modification of dimensions. And at the end of it, we will have a 3D model. So before we really get into it, I suppose first thing we should do is talk about what parametric actually means. It's in the title of the software that we're using. You probably should know what it is. So basically, parametric is means that you can take the geometric definitions of the design and change them at any time, whether it be changing them in the sketch while you're creating it, or coming back 6 months later and modifying a feature in the model tree. Now we'll get into that quite a bit more as we go through this. But that's basically what parametrics is. It's just you can go back in any dimension, any constraint, any feature. You can change it whenever you want. Now that we know kind of what we're going to be doing today, let's just get right into it. Creating a part modeling in Creo, or really any parametric software, has a kind of certain number of steps or certain order that you do things in. Now, obviously, it's not 100% of the time. There will be exceptions to stuff like this, but the basic list, the basic steps that you're going to take to create a part go like this. Step 1, set up your units for whatever you're going to be using, millimeters or inches. Very simple. Step 2, create a modeling plan. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in depth in the next video, but you're going to create a modeling plan for anything that you're going to want to model. And let me bring up what we're going to be doing today. Okay, this is the part we're going to be making today. And when I say create a modeling plan, what I mean is really step 1 is select your base feature. And that's really what I want to focus on today, is selecting a base feature. What that means is you can start anywhere you want on this model. It's up to you. There is no wrong way to go about it. However, a smart way of going about it, or an efficient way of going about it, is to select a feature or a part of the model where you can get the most amount of detail out of that one feature. So if we look at this, I've got this little offshoot here. This is one feature. I've got a wall here, I've got a back wall here, I've got another side wall over here. I've got all these different features. Now I could create this, and that could be our base feature, and that's valid. That would absolutely work. Or I could ignore this little cutoff and create this L shape here. That could be our base feature. Would absolutely work. Or what we're going to do in this video, I can select this rectangular arch here. And if I create this, I'm getting the most amount of detail, the most amount of this model done in one feature. And doing that as your base feature is, like I said, it's really the most efficient way of going about it. Doesn't mean it's correct. It doesn't mean it's better than any other way. But like I said, it's efficient. And it gives you then more options on how you're going to create subsequent features, which goes back to creating a modeling plan, knowing where you're going to go next from that base feature. And again, we'll get more into modeling plans next video. All right, back to the steps. Step 3 would then to be create a 2D sketch of that base feature. Step 4, apply any constraints or dimensions that need to be added to that sketch. And step 5 would then be to convert that sketch into a 3D feature by way of an extrude or a sweep or a revolve or whatever method you're going to be using. And then for the rest of the model, you're just going to repeat those steps over and over again. You'll go back to step 2, only instead of determining a base feature, you're then going to determine what feature comes next. Create a 2D sketch, add your constraints and dimensions, create the 3D part or feature, and so on until your part is complete. All right, let me get my notes out of the way here. All right, so now that we know the basic steps that we're going to be taking, let's go ahead and just get into it. So I've got Creo open here. Get rid of that. Now with Creo, if you watched the last video, the very first thing that you're going to do when you open Creo is you want to go up here to select working directory. And here you want to navigate to whatever folder it is that you want to keep your projects in. Now, if you didn't watch the first video, let me just reiterate. CAD files get chaotic quickly. Even just this one file, the more and you'll see this, we'll come back to it later once we've saved it a couple of times. Creo will save a different version of this file every time we click save. So it'll say something like adjuster.prt.1 or .prt.2, and it'll just keep all these different versions. So if you save all the time like I tend to, you might end up with 10 to 15 versions of this file. And if you're doing 10 different parts, you've now got 100 plus different files, just in wherever, and just scattered wherever, if you're not organized. So select your working directory, decide where you're going to save all of your files, and keep them organized from the beginning. So this is where I'm going to keep mine, Introduction in Chapter 1. Save yours wherever you want. Once your working directory is selected, we are now ready to go. We're going to click on New, and it's going to bring up our new file dialog box. We're creating a part, so we're going to leave this here on part. It is going to be a solid, so we're going to leave it there on solid. And we just need a file name. Now the file name, you really do however you want. Personally, I prefer part numbers as well as descriptions. So this one I'm going to name 236-01-LP and then underscore adjuster. Now the reason for all the dashes and underscores is very simple. Creo does not allow spaces in your file names. So everything is going to be separated by dashes and underscores. Now here, use default template. Make a habit of always unchecking that box. This is going to force you to really think about what units you're using. It's very easy to leave that checked, click OK, and it's going to take you right into your 3D space, and you're just going to get to work. And then maybe an hour or two from now, you realize, oh crap, I'm in inches, I'm supposed to be in millimeters. And you can convert it, it works. But it's just much easier to know from the beginning that you're in the correct units. So uncheck that box, click OK. Oh, apparently I've already done this file. All right, well, just going to add a 1 to mine. All right, then it's going to bring up your new file options, and this is where you can choose your units. It defaults to inches, or inch part solid. You can come down to millimeters, or you can come up here and click on empty. This will force you to select your units a different way. So again, we can leave it here on inches, and I'm going to go ahead and just leave it here because we are working in inches, but I will also show you how to change the units, once we're inside the file. So click OK, and it'll drop us into our 3D space. Now, if you watched the first video, you know that there are 2 things that I'm going to do right away. I'm going to go up here to our drop-down menu and down to More Commands. First setting I'm going to change is right here under Model Display. I'm going to change my model orientation from trimetric to isometric. Now, like I said before, personal preference. If you don't like isometric, or if you're fine with trimetric, you don't have to change this. Personally, I hate trimetric views, so I changed mine to isometric. The other one is in Sketcher. Now this one I highly recommend. Come down here to Sketcher Startup and check this box. Make the sketching plane parallel to the screen. And you'll see once we start creating 2D sketches, you're going to select a work plane to create the sketch on. If you have this checked, it's then going to take that plane and rotate it so that it's flat on your screen. So you're actually creating a 2D sketch flat. You can rotate it manually. There's a button that you can click, but it's just much easier to just have it automatically flip to where it's parallel to your screen. Click OK. And again, if you'd like, you can create a configuration file. I don't, just because I like making myself go in and change settings so that I know, so I can remember where they are. A long time ago, I'd forget where settings were, and it would take me 20 minutes to remember how to navigate to a certain setting. So now little things like this, I just make myself do every time I open it. All right, now we are in isometric view, and we are ready to go. Oh, but before we do, I was going to show you how to change the units once you're already in here. So we're going to go over here to File, and we're going to come down to Prepare, up to Model Properties. And this is going to bring up a whole bunch of properties that we can deal with. The one we're looking for is right here. It's Units. Come over here to Change. And it's going to give us our different options. Centimeters, grams, seconds, foot, pound, seconds, inches, pounds, seconds, whatever you want them. Whatever you want them to be. Again, we're just going to stay here, inch, pound, seconds. Now, actually, before I do that, I do want to show you what it does. If I change this to millimeter, I suppose I have to have set. That's what I was looking for. When you go to set this to a different unit, it's going to ask you, do you want to convert these dimensions or do you want to interpret these dimensions? Converting these dimensions is going to take whatever measurement is in there and it's going to convert it to the equivalent dimension in the other units. So like it says here, 1 inch becomes 25.4 millimeters because 25.4 millimeters equals 1 inch. Interpreting the dimensions is just going to change the unit name. So if you have something in there as 1 inch, this will just change it to 1 millimeter. Again, though, we're going to stay here in inches. Now you can change a whole bunch of different things in here. We're not going to get into any of this today. One of the later videos we might go through this in a little more detail. The next thing we want to look at are our datum planes or our work planes. We've got 3 planes to start with. And over here in our tree, we've got them listed out. We've got our right plane. Let me rotate this just a little bit. There we go. We've got our right side plane, our top plane, and our front plane. That's what we start with. Now, as I said before, you can create your own datums to work with, but it is easiest, highly recommended, and it just makes sense to just use one of the 3 datum planes that are already present and then create whatever it is you need to create off of that. But start here with your 3 world planes. I just realized that my keyboard logger is not on. Hold on a second. There it goes. All right. Sorry about that. I don't think I've done anything yet that you missed, so it should be okay. Now, all this stuff that's in here, this can all be turned off and on. You don't have to have all this displayed. You can, But really, once you get going, this is going to get really, really cluttered. So to turn this off and on, there's a couple of different ways to do it. You can go up here to your ribbon and go to View. And over here, you have this tab, or this ribbon here with all your different things. You've got your planes that you can turn on and off. Your axes, which we don't have any yet, but this will turn them on and off. Any points you can turn off here. Your coordinate system, turn that off and on. Your annotations, your dimension backgrounds, and then down here are your tags or your labels. So if you turn that on, it'll actually pop a label on all of your planes. So it's very helpful if you're having a hard time kind of visualizing what you're looking at. So you can see, oh, that's my front, that's the top, that's the right. And you've got the same here for axes and for points, as well as your coordinate system. You can turn that off and on. And then this one here, this is your spin center. The red, green, and blue, or the cyan little triad here. When you orbit by holding your middle mouse button down and rotating, you can see that's where it's going to spin from. Again, that's called your spin center. And you can leave that on or you can turn it off. I leave it off because it kind of gets in the way. And actually most of this I tend to keep turned off. But it's up to you how you want to do it. The other way is right here on this bar. You've got your displays right here. You can turn off your planes, turn off your coordinate system, again, points and axes. You can do them all at once. That's actually one that I use quite a bit. And you've got annotation display here, and you've also got your spin center here as well. Now, we know kind of what our work planes are. Let's go ahead and get right into our model. Again, let's bring up the design. Again, this is called the adjuster. And what we're going to look for here is our base feature. And I kind of already went over this. But what I'm doing here is I'm looking at this rectangular arch. I'm ignoring this cutout here. We're going to put that in later. We're just going to make this one rectangular arch as our base feature. And as you can see, if you look at this kind of compared, hold on a second. There we go. If you look at this compared to your work planes, you'll start seeing a similarity just on their orientation. So this surface here, you can see kind of coincides with our top plane. And same here, you've got this surface here. It's going to coincide with our front plane. And these surfaces will coincide with our right plane. Some people see this and it makes total sense right away. Other people look at this and it just looks like a screen full of gibberish. Trust me, just keep working at it. It is a skill to be developed over time. The ability to visualize a 3D object in reference to two-dimensional work planes. If you don't just automatically see it, it is hard. But give it time; it will click. So again, we're going to use this as our base feature, which means we need to start with a 2D sketch of that feature. And again, since this looks like our top plane, this surface here, that's what we're going to use as our sketching plane. Now, to get to your sketching plane, there's a couple of different ways to do it. You can just go right for the 3D tool that you're going to eventually use and go through the process that way. Or you can actually just start a sketch on its own and then flow into your 3D tool after you've done the sketch. Personal preference. There is no right or wrong way. Personally, I prefer to just start with a sketch and then go to my 3D tool later. Some people prefer it the other way around. I'm going to show you both ways real quick, just so you can see what I mean. So right up here, this is going to be an extrusion. When we create the 3D feature, it's going to be an extrusion. So we're going to just start here with extrude. And it's going to bring up our extrusion toolbar. And you'll notice some tabs here that come up, one of them being red. That's telling us that this is required. If you don't put something here, nothing's going to work. And that's our placement tab. And it's asking us here to select a work plane. So we're going to click on define. What plane is it? We're going to use the top plane. And then it's going to try to automatically fill in the orientation or the reference planes. Essentially what it wants to do is it wants a perpendicular reference plane so that it can kind of orient that plane to however you want to look at it. And it'll give you options here. Where do you want the reference plane to be? And all that's going to do, I'll use this as my plane. All that's going to do is it's saying, okay, here's the right plane. Do you want this right plane over here? Do you want the right plane over here? See if you can see my hand. Do you want the right plane to be over here? Do you want the right plane to be up here? That's all this reference is doing, is it's just asking you how to orient the work plane that you are trying to select. And usually whatever it comes up with, that's usually right. So you can generally trust what it comes up with. And then you just click sketch, and it's going to rotate that plane and give us a 2D sketch plane or a Cartesian coordinate plane for us to sketch on. Cartesian just essentially being your XY plane. If you've taken like a basic algebra class, you remember your XY plane, that's all a Cartesian plane is. It's just a rectangular XY two-dimensional plane. So that's how you get here through the extrude tool or through any tool, 3D tool like that. However, I'm going to cancel out of this and cancel out of this. Go back to our beginning here and show you how I like to do things. Once again, personal preference. There is no right or wrong way. In fact, you're going to hear me say that a bunch. So let me make sure that I just say it as clearly as I can right now. There is no right way to do things when it comes to 3D modeling. There are preferred ways. There are maybe more efficient ways, maybe faster ways, but really all that matters is the end result. So you and I could go about a model 10 different ways. As long as the end result is what you wanted and follows the design intent of the engineer or whoever's wanting this part, then whatever you did is correct. So you might see me throughout these videos create something, a feature or a part, and you might look at it and think, why would he have ever gone about it that way? Chances are I went about it that way because there's a certain tool or a certain technique that I wanted to show you. It's not necessarily the way I would do it if I was just creating the model. Or you might just see the model differently than me, and you might have seen a different way. You might see a better way to go about it. Doesn't mean what I did was wrong. Doesn't mean what you're doing is wrong. As long as the end result is what it's supposed to be, whatever you did to get there is great. So here's how I like to start my sketches. I select my plane first. I know that we're sketching on the top plane, so I select my top plane and I click sketch. And it cuts out all of that rigmarole that we went through with the select this plane, select your reference plane, where do you want that reference plane placed, and it just makes the assumption, if I rotate back here, it just makes the assumption that it's going to rotate. This is going to be the top of my screen, this will be the left of my screen, this will be the bottom, this will be the right. It makes that assumption and sets my screen parallel to my monitor here. We're ready to go. It's just simpler for me. Now to get back to our sketcher, we've got a button here, sketch view. Clicking this brings you back to your Cartesian sketch view. That's an important button to remember, because as you're going through here, you will over and over again accidentally do that, where you didn't mean to, but you hit the wrong button and you rotated just a bit, and now you're off kilter. Click here. That's going to bring you back to flat. Now we're ready to actually create our 2D sketch. And this is where, in the beginning, I talked about the shape before size concept. Basically what this means is when you're creating a 2D sketch in parametric software, you are not concerned about the dimensions being correct right away, or even the shape being proportionate right away. You just want to get a rough sketch of kind of what you're doing, and then you want to use dimensions and constraints to pull everything together. So now this one's a very rectangular, straightforward sketch. Go back to our model here. Again, we're just doing this rectangular arch. It's a very straightforward sketch, so there's not going to be a lot of zigging and zagging, but we don't have to worry about everything being right as we make the sketch. I'll show you what I mean. So we're going to go ahead. We've got our sketching tools up here, which this tab here, the sketch tab, this appears when you start your sketcher. And in this area here, these are all of your basic sketch tools. You've got lines, rectangles, circles, just a whole bunch of different tools to create your sketches. And for this one, we're going to start with just our basic line tool. Now to start, you always want to start somewhere around your origin, which this XYZ, this middle point right here, this is your origin. This is where you want your sketch to be. While I could start my sketch way over here, that's fine. You want to keep it as close to your origin as possible, because we will eventually, and you'll learn this later on, we will be using these work planes as a way to create other features, as a way to offset or mirror features. And the more symmetrical that we make things, the better off we're going to be. So even on items that don't necessarily need to be symmetrical in reference to the work planes, we're going to make them as symmetrical as we can, just to make sure that we get in that habit. It's a wonderful habit to be in, to keep things symmetrical, or at least butted up against work planes for future features. So again, we're just going to use our line tool, and for this we're going to start at the origin, and we're just going to create the basic shape just like that. And when you're done, click your middle mouse. That cancels your tool. Click it again, and that sets the sketch. So if we now compare this, again, this is the shape we're looking for. And this is the basic shape that we sketched. Now, what you saw happen here is once we completed this sketch, you see how it's shaded in. When you are creating a sketch, this, generally speaking, is what you want to have happen. This shading in means that you have a closed loop, and that is how you're going to make your extrusion. This area in here is what's going to be extruded. If it's not closed, it's not going to extrude it. Like if this line didn't exist, you can see that shading went away. I've got a couple of red dots here telling me, hey, you've got a gap down here. You're not going to be able to do anything with this. So when you're creating your sketches, when you're done, if it's not shaded in, there's a gap somewhere, or there's a problem somewhere. And it can get difficult to find the problem, but we'll deal with that when we get there. So again, let's create the sketch again. I'm going to go to line, just left click on line, and you'll see how it snaps to these different areas. We're going to learn a lot about the snapping action later on, but this is what you want it to do. This gives you a definite point of contact. And this intersection here, where these two planes go through and the origin exists, that gives you a nice point of contact to really set this first point at. So we're going to left click to start our line, and then just bring our mouse wherever we take it, that line's going to follow. We're going to bring it straight up. And now if you notice that little circle with the vertical line that popped up next to my cursor, that is a geometric constraint. Creo is going to attempt to automatically apply any obvious constraints. So if I'm bringing a line straight up, it's going to automatically try to apply that vertical constraint, meaning that this line will always be vertical unless I try to make it be otherwise. Whereas if I move this off of vertical, you see that constraint disappears. So if you know this is going to be a vertical line, allow Creo to drop that constraint in there for you. And same when I go this direction. You can see I've got nothing, but once I get horizontal, it'll snap to that horizontal, and you can see that circle popped up next to it with the horizontal line. That's my horizontal constraint. And it's going to do that all the way around. And you can see when I click, you can see all those different circles all over the place. Those are all constraints that are being applied. And again, just left click, and you'll see stuff like this happen as well. When I come over, you'll see a line highlight green, and you see that shaded blue constraint being applied there. That's an equal constraint. That means that if I set this line right here, Creo is going to tell it that those two lines, the one that I'm creating and the highlighted green line, are going to be equal in length. And that's really convenient for some things. Sometimes it's inconvenient. So really pay attention when you're creating these sketches, and watch for whatever constraints that Creo is trying to apply. And if it's not one that you want, or it's not one that you're intentionally trying to set, don't let it. So for this one, if I see, you see it's trying to do that a couple different times, I'm just going to keep going until that unhighlights, I guess, so that it does not put that constraint, because I don't want these two lines to be equal. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but right now I don't know. So I'm going to make sure that that constraint is not there. Down here, and then close our sketch back here at the beginning. And then we'll right click to cancel out of that, and right click to exit the line tool, and that will complete our sketch. Now, using our middle mouse wheel, it seems counterintuitive at first, because most things up until now for people, you scroll away from yourself to zoom in and scroll towards yourself to zoom out. It's the opposite in Creo. You scroll towards you to zoom in and away from you to zoom out. Again, it can feel counterintuitive because up to this point, most people are used to the opposite, but you'll get used to it real quick. So zoom in here, and then I also want to pan. Now to pan, oh, wrong one. There's different key combinations that you can use. Control, that's one I just used. Control and your middle mouse wheel clicked. That's another zoom. Shift with your middle mouse wheel, that's pan. That'll allow you to drag your sketch wherever you need it to be. If you don't hold down shift, what's going to happen is you're going to orbit. You're going to rotate that sketch around in 3D space. And it's just more difficult to sketch like this. So again, we can zoom in, use shift in our middle mouse to pan, and set this sketch wherever it needed to be. All right, so let's look at our constraints that we have already applied. We have vertical constraints. We have horizontal constraints. We have these, which are called point on entity. Basically, we should have a couple of these. If you connect to a reference line like this plane, or here like this origin, it's going to create a constraint called point on entity, which basically means this point goes right here. And all of these constraints are right up here. You can add any of these constraints that you want. Like if we do have lines that we want to have equal, say I did want these lines to be equal, I can add it manually. Just click equal and say this line and this line. And you can see it added, middle mouse click to cancel the tool. And you can see it added that equal constraint to those lines. Now, I don't want that constraint, so we're going to delete that. FYI, right clicking, I don't know if you can hear my mouse, if I just right click like you normally would, nothing's going to happen. Or if I click and hold, that's when that option window is going to pop up. And now I can delete. You also have an explain button. That's going to bring up an explanation down here. Highlighted linear segments have equal lengths, just telling you what that little symbol is. And let's delete that. So those are constraints. And again, we've got a bunch of them. We've got vertical and horizontal, which are pretty self-explanatory. Perpendicular and parallel, both of those should be pretty self-explanatory. Coincident basically means that those 2 points lie on each, like right here, this endpoint and this endpoint, those are coincident. It means they exist in the same space. Midpoint, every line segment has a middle point. I can create a line, see that middle dot there? That's its midpoint. So if I create a line there, it's going to attach to that midpoint, and you can see it's going to attach that midpoint constraint to it. Tangent. Tangent has to deal with circles and arcs, and usually line segments, sometimes circle to circle. Basically, when a circle and a line share one point of contact, that's its point of tangency. And we'll get into that later when we have more circular objects to create. You have equal, which we just saw with creating equal length line segments. And then symmetric, you can set up a construction line or a center line and create symmetry between sides. Which, yeah, we can go ahead and do real quick. So if I were to take a center line here and just say, I'll drop it right there. I can then say, okay, I want this point and this point to be symmetric around that center line. And that's exactly what it does. Now this point and this point are both the same distance from that center line. It's a wonderful tool that we don't need right now, but later on, not in this video, but later projects we will. Okay, back to the point. Sorry, kind of went off on a tangent there. So what we're going to do now is we're going to set up the dimensions that we want. Now, Creo is going to set up dimensions that it thinks you might want. And a lot of times, some of them are right, but sometimes they're not dimensions that you know. For example, in this particular object, I'm not explicitly given these two dimensions. I'm also not explicitly given this dimension. I'm given them, but not as that. And I'll show you what I mean. Go to our dimension tool. And that starts our dimensioner. And like this dimension here, I don't know what this value is, but I know what this value is between this line and this line. So I'll select those two lines, and then I'm going to click my middle mouse wheel to set that dimension. And you can see what it did here is it took away this dimension and replaced it with the one that I told it I actually wanted. And we'll just go through. I know this dimension I definitely do want. I know I want the distance between these two lines. So just select those and then click our middle mouse button. And then this dimension here, again, I'm not explicitly given this dimension, but I do know that this is equal all the way around. So we're going to use our equal constraint. And we're going to set these two lines equal to each other. And you can see how it got rid of that dimension for me. So now we are just left with the dimensions that we know. And now, obviously, these are not the dimensions that we're going to use. We have specific numbers in mind here. And what we're going to do is we're going to modify them all at once. And now, you can change these now, one at a time. I'll show you what it does, though. I know this dimension is 3.5 inches. So I'm going to change this to 3.5. That's what it does to my sketch. And while I can go through and find those different dimensions and figure out what they were supposed to be and get all this straightened out, it's difficult, especially once you start getting into more complex sketches. So instead of doing that, our initial sketch here, I like to modify these dimensions all at once so that the sketch then reforms proportionally. And to do that, we come over here to our select, and we're going to select all. And we're going to come over to modify, and that's going to allow us to modify all of our dimensions. See, I've got 4 dimensions here, and I've got 4 dimensions over here. First thing we want to do is we want to uncheck regenerate. If we don't, then as soon as we change one of these, it's going to do exactly what it did before, and it's going to make the sketch go all wonky, and we're going to be right back where we started. So we uncheck regenerate, click on our first box, and when we do that, you can see it's going to highlight the dimension that we are changing. So now this first dimension is going to be 0.75. And it's going to move over to our next dimension here, which is 2. And it then moves over to this dimension, which is 3. And then to our last dimension, which is 3.5. And once we click OK, this will then regenerate and shrink way down. And it's going to look more like the shape here that we're looking for. In fact, it looks exactly like the shape we're looking for. Now, not completely necessary, but I do like to grab now these dimensions and kind of drag them back down to the actual sketch. And you can just click and hold and then just drag them over. Again, it's not completely necessary, but for me, I very much prefer for my sketches to be nice and neat like this. It makes coming back and doing edits much, much easier. So that is our initial sketch. If I go back to our isometric view, which the shortcut for that, Control D, brings us back to isometric. And this gives you kind of a 3D view of what that sketch is. And I do that so I can bring this up and you can kind of now see here's what we were looking for, and here's the sketch that we just created. And we're going to click OK to accept this sketch. And click Control D again to bring it kind of back into view. And there's our sketch in the world space. Now, the next step is going to be to turn this into a 3-dimensional feature. And to do that, go up here to Shapes, and we've got our 4 basic tools: Extrude, Revolve, Sweep, Swept, Blend. Now there are more. You've got regular blend, rotational blend. There's a whole bunch of different things that we can do. But the most common is going to be Extrude, Revolve, and Sweep. with by far extrude being the most common, which is the one we're going to use right now. I'm going to click extrude, and you can see right away it's just grabbing the interior of that sketch and it's extruding it out. It's pushing it out in the third dimension. So we have our Z dimension here, we have our X dimension here, and then this is going to push it up in our Y dimension. Now, obviously this is not the exact size that we want, but it gets it started for us. Now you can grab here and drag, but really what we want to do is we want to come up here and change this value to whatever we want it to be, which in this case is going to be 2.5. You can see it sets it out here to 2.5. We also have different options over here. We'll get into these a little bit later. Extrude as. We're not going to use surface in any of these. We're going to keep with solids, but I'll just show you. You can click surface. Lost it. There it is. And you can see all it does is just extrudes the outside of that sketch as a surface. But we're just going to leave everything as solid. Now, before I said that I like to keep everything symmetrical. That includes my extrusions. So right now it's extruding from the top plane up 2.5 inches. What I'd like it to do though is be symmetrical across that top plane. So over here, we've got our three options. This one is just extrude by a depth value. This one is what we want, extrude symmetrically on both sides of the sketch plane. And this one is extrude up to selected surfaces, edges, anything else that we can use as a stopping point. But like I said, we're going to use symmetrically. And it's still 2.5 inches. But what it's doing is it's going up 1.25 inches and it's going down 1.25 inches. And we'll click OK. Click out in space, and there is our first feature. Now I'm going to do two things here. First, I'm going to shut off. You can see all these planes. It's going to start getting really cluttered in here. This is where I come in and I just shut all this off. Much, much cleaner and much easier to see. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in to display style, and I'm going to change this, and again, this is personal preference, to shading with edges. All that's going to do is it's just going to pop those edges on here. All these edges you can see, and it just makes the object much, much more clear when I'm looking at it. Go back to what it was, just shaded. You can still see it, and if this works for you, great. But like I said, personally, when I'm modeling, I much prefer shading with edges. All right, so now that we have our base feature set up, let's go back to our picture here. Now we've got a couple more features to make. The next one we're going to do is this little offshoot right here. We're going to create that feature. A couple different ways to do it. I'm going to do it one way. Feel free to do it a different way if you want. The way I'm going to do it is I'm actually going to sketch this side rectangle. And I'm going to use the side of our base feature as my sketch plane. So when you're creating sketches, like I said at the beginning, you've got these three sketch planes to start. Once you've got a base feature created, you now have the opportunity to use any of those surfaces as a sketch plane. So for this offshoot here that's coming off of this side surface, I can actually use this surface as my sketch plane, which is exactly what I'm going to do. And this is one of the reasons why I like setting up my sketches the way I do, instead of going through the extrude tool. Because here I just select, okay, this is the surface that I want to use, start my sketch. And it's going to rotate that around. Here is now my sketch plane. You can see this. Same exact thing as a datum plane. Same Cartesian coordinates. There we go. Now for this, we're actually going to use the edges of the base feature as our references. We're going to use our rectangle tool, and we're going to start at the bottom corner of the base feature. Left click there, and our rectangle tool allows us to just drag a rectangle shape in whatever direction we need. For this one, it's going to come this direction, and it's going to snap to the opposite edge of this base feature. And we'll just select anywhere over here. Just make sure that you're not selecting midpoints or endpoints, because that's going to create a whole different constraint that we don't want. All we want is that this point lies somewhere on this line. We'll just set it there. Then right click, and you'll notice we get our nice shaded sketch. We get our vertical and our horizontal constraints, our point on entity, and a dimension. And that dimension is really the only thing we need to change. Now what's great is once you've gotten your initial sketch done and your base feature created, you can now easily modify dimensions one at a time, because now everything is proportionate. Everything's to scale, so that your sketch isn't going to go all wonky like it did the first time. So here I can just double click on the dimension, and we'll change this to 0.75. And we'll just click OK. Rotate this back around, and you can see our rectangle sketch sitting there on the side. Once again, go back to our extrude tool, and you can see it's going to kick that out for us. Not quite as far as we want it. Go up to depth, change that to 2.5. Everything else looks good, and click OK. And there is our second feature. Let's compare it to the picture here. See, it is getting very, very close to being complete. We only have 2 features that are missing. We've got a hole cut out here, and we have this little corner that's been chopped off as well. Personally, I always like to save holes for the end. It's just habit, really. So for this, we're going to go ahead next and go to the corner. And to do that, just like we did before, we're going to use this surface as our sketch plane. Bring our model back up. You can see that's where that corner is being chopped off. We'll use this as our sketch plane. Click on sketch. And so all we really need to do here is just draw a triangle to notch that off. To do that, we're going to use our line. Let's come here to this edge, bring it up to the corner, bring it over here, and then close our triangle. Right click to cancel, and right click to exit the tool, and there's our triangle. Now we just need to set the dimensions. Now for this, I know this dimension, but I don't know this one. Instead, what I know is I know the angle between these 2 lines. So we're going to set that in there. Go to our dimension tool. I'm going to click on this line and click on the other line. And now we're going to we're going to middle click to set the dimension. Now when you're doing angles, wherever you middle click, that's where it's going to assume that you want the angle. So if I middle click here, it's going to set that angle between those 2 lines. However, if I select these 2 lines and I middle click over here, it's going to set that angle over this direction. So just be aware of where you need that angle to go and make sure that you are clicking in that area. So I know this angle, I want to make sure that I right click between those 2 lines. And that is a 45. Now you can see I did say I know this dimension, but Creo took it away and left me with this one. That is fine. We just come back here, select that line, right click above it, and it'll bring that one back and get rid of this one. This dimension is 1. And there is a sketch for our notch. Click OK to exit the sketch. And again, we're going to use our extrude tool. Now it's going to try to extrude it out like this. We, however, need this to go the other direction. You can just drag that the other direction, and it's going to automatically see what you're doing. If I drag this back here, it's going to come back this direction. The other option is you've got a button up here that'll change the direction of that extrusion. Now, Creo will make some assumptions. Like I said, if you've got a sketch on a surface and you're extruding it through that surface, it's going to assume that you're removing material. You can tell it not to. See how now it's extruding through there without removing any material. But like I said, it's going to make an assumption based on what direction it's facing and what it is coming up against. Now for this, there are different ways to do this. For this one in particular, we're going to use this option, which is extrude up to a selected surface. Now, it might not look necessary because it's doing exactly what we wanted it to do, but that cut is actually extended all the way out to this point, which means later on, if I have anything over here, this cut might go through that, and I want to make sure that that doesn't happen. So I'm going to stop that cut at this surface. So this is the option we want. Here it's asking us to select one item. I'm going to select this surface, and it's going to stop that cut at that surface. And OK. Bring the picture of our model back up. Looks like all we've got left is this hole to cut out. And we're going to do it just like we did everything else. We know the hole is going through this feature here. So we're going to use this as our sketch surface. And we're just going to use our circle tool. Left click anywhere over here. And then drag out a circle of any size. And middle mouse click to set your circle. And let's go ahead and drag these dimensions out so that you can see what Creo did for us. Now Creo has actually automatically given me the dimensions that I know. So that worked out great. If it didn't, like say I didn't know from this edge to the circle, then I could change it by coming up here and saying, no, I want from this edge to the center of that circle. And it'll change that for me. But these are the ones I want. I just need to fix the values to what I need them to be. This is going to be 1.5. This will be 1.25. And now before I change this last dimension, I want you to notice the change in color that happens to these dimensions when I enter in a dimension, or when I change it to a different location. Everything's color coded. This light blue means that this is a weak dimension. It means that anything else that conflicts with this is going to go away. These are strong dimensions. You can see if I hover over it, it actually says strong. It means that if I try to place something that conflicts with this dimension, I'm going to have to fix that manually because it's not going to change this on its own. So let's go ahead and change this. Diameter of 1. There's my sketch. Click OK. And again, back to extrude. I can see nothing really happened. You want to make sure that you have your sketch selected before you click on your tool. You can get back there. Let me go ahead and unselect that and go to extrude. You can just come over here and select your sketch. that absolutely works. Or you can come in here and find your sketch. That works too. For me, best habit to be in is before you go to your tool, just have your sketch selected. Now again, this is a hole, so we want it to go the other direction. And when we do, Creo is going to automatically assume that we want to cut. Now for this one, for through holes like this, there's an option here called through all, or extrude to intersect with all surfaces. Essentially, it's a through all button, which means anything that gets in the way of this is going to be cut. There's our hole. And there is our completed model. With the model completed, this is a good time to show you what I meant before with regard to parametrics. I can now go back, essentially go back in time and adjust absolutely anything that I've done, and the model will update accordingly. So if I decided that this space was too narrow, excuse me, and I wanted to make this a little bit wider, I can come back to my first sketch. Here's sketch 1. Click on it. Right here, this is my edit sketch, edit definition. And it brings me back to that initial sketch. I can then change this dimension. Say I wanted this to be 2.5. And it updates everything for me. That's the benefit of parametrics, is being able to go back in time and adjust your design anytime that you want. There we go. All right, now that we're done here, go up here to save. Again, it's going to bring up your working directory. File name's already there. All you have to do is click OK. And that's it. In the next video, we're going to continue to build on this. We're going to get into constructive solid geometry concepts. We're going to get into Boolean operations, the importance of order of features, how to use the different extrusion options. Yeah, so come back for the next video, and I will see you then.